that freaking 5-year-old at times. But even in those moments, I still make sure that she knows that I love her.
That wasn't a script. That was the voice of a real father. And yet, just days ago, he drowned at Playa Grande right before his daughter's eyes. That weekend, the skies were clear, the waves were calm, and the white sand stretched like a postcard. But beneath those blue waters lay a truth no one dared to touch. Malcolm Jamal Warner, the man who once lit up American television as Theo Huxtable, died in broad daylight on a family vacation. And the world took just 3 days to forget. No one mentioned his daughter, even though that 8-year-old girl was there. She saw everything. There was no footage, no audio, no witnesses, only a spreading silence and one cold official line: accidental drowning. Just days earlier, Malcolm had released a controversial podcast, boldly calling out the hypocrisy and control systems behind how black artists are treated in entertainment. Then suddenly, he went silent forever. Was it just a coincidence, or was it a warning silence before it could be heard? Keep watching to uncover the truth they never wanted you to hear, and subscribe now, because this is only the beginning. 72 hours of silence and 3 versions of a death. Playa Grande, Costa Rica, July 20th, 2025. A stunning beach along the Atlantic coast where sunlight kisses every cresting wave. No one expected it to be the place where a television icon, Malcolm Jamal Warner, would leave this world under strangely silent circumstances. No cry for help, no video capturing his final moments, no one stepping forward to say goodbye. Just a red flag flapping in the wind, signaling danger in a chain of conflicting reports unraveling over the next 72 hours. It all began as a simple story: he drowned, but the deeper we look, the more unbelievable it becomes. The Costa Rican Judicial Investigation Agency, OIJ, was the first to speak. In a broadcast aired on July 21st, they issued a brief statement. The victim appears to have entered the ocean and was swept away by the current. He was pulled to shore by passers-by and treated by the Red Cross, but did not survive. No mention of anyone else. Not a word about any companions. The entire account painted a picture of Warner alone in the water, swept away and lost. But less than 24 hours later, a second report emerged, this time with a new detail. A 35-year-old unidentified man had been swimming with Warner and survived. Suddenly, a new character entered the narrative. No name, no nationality, no face. A mysterious man, supposedly in the same water at the same time, yet no one knew who he was. No images, no testimonies, no interviews. Stranger still, no one on the scene confirmed this man's existence aside from government officials. Then came the third report, and everything changed. For the first time, the public learned that Malcolm's 8-year-old daughter had been at the scene. Not only present, but she was the only one in the water with her father when the rip current struck. According to accounts released afterward, a surfer had rushed into the churning water and used his board to bring the girls safely to shore. Volunteer lifeguards then pulled both Malcolm and the surfer from the sea. Warner was given CPR for 45 minutes, but could not be revived. Why did it take until the third version for anyone to mention his daughter? And why did no initial report mention the one person who may have witnessed everything from beginning to end? Albert Lane, head of the Atlantic Division of the Tourist Police who was present that day, told a very different story. According to him, Warner and his daughter had been playing in the sand at the shoreline when the rip current pulled them out. Lane emphasized that he saw Warner struggling to keep his daughter afloat, but they dismissed this in their final report. According to them, Warner had left his daughter on the beach and entered the water with a male companion. They claimed 2 adults were swept away and only one came back. But as Lane pushed back, they weren't at the scene. I know what I saw. Why are there 3 entirely different accounts of the same event, each from a different official agency who stands to gain from blurring the truth? And perhaps the biggest question, who is the 35-year-old man? According to the initial investigation, he was taken to the hospital and later discharged in stable condition. But after that, he vanished from the narrative. No journalist ever interviewed him. No grainy paparazzi photo from afar. No social media post, even though the event became a media firestorm. While celebrities around the world posted tributes, the sole survivor of that moment remained a ghost. And Malcolm's wife confirmed to be on a vacation, but completely silent. No media appearances, no spokesperson statement. In a public event where everyone carries phones, uses social media, and live streams, there was no footage, no local claim to have seen anything. As if that moment, 20 p.m. on July 20th, was wiped clean from the timeline. Mike Gist, lifeguard trainer and VP of the Caribbean Guard Team, says group regularly patrol Playa Grande every Sunday. But that day, the team had relocated to another beach. It's hard for us to accept. We should have been there, he said. That single decision to change location created a deadly vacuum. No professional guards, no emergency signals in time. Why that day? Playa Grande is known for its beauty, but also for its danger, especially with the presence of rip currents. Numerous travel blogs have listed it among the most dangerous beaches in the Caribbean. The red flag was real that day, but according to the first image that circulated on social media, there were no English warning signs nearby. All signage was in Spanish. Days later, TMZ published a clear photo of a bilingual warning, but did not clarify when it was taken. Did someone attempt to rewrite reality after the fact? Malcolm Jamal Warner was not a reckless man. Those close to him described him as a devoted father, cautious, loving, methodical, a man who once said, "I would drop everything just to camp with my daughter under the stars." So, should we believe he brought his own daughter into red flag waters? No life vest, no clear warnings without hesitation. Or is that the story someone wants us to believe? 3 versions, 1 victim, 1 eyewitness, 1 nameless ghost, and a silence stretching from Playa Grande all the way to Hollywood. When truth is broken into scattered pieces, the only person who can piece it back together might be that 8-year-old girl. She saw everything, and now she may be the one breaking the silence the adults created. The final words, a prophetic podcast. 2 days before Malcolm Jamal Warner drowned in Costa Rica, he released a podcast episode titled Not All Hood. With a calm intro and his familiar composed tone, he began discussing a topic seemingly far from deaf Black identity resilience and the historical wounds that never truly healed. But the longer you listened, the more chilling it became because what he said that day now echoes like a coded farewell, or worse, a warning no one heeded. In that episode, Malcolm delivered a line that made the entire Black community pause and reflect. Black excellence today isn't about fame or money. It's about survival. He recalled the first time his perspective shifted while discussing forgotten history of Black soldiers who fought and were then erased from the narrative. To him, overcoming prejudice and systemic exclusion wasn't just a struggle, it was the highest achievement. His voice steady, earnest, occasionally wavering, sounded like he was speaking about himself. He wasn't chanting slogans. He wasn't angrily denouncing. He chose instead to recount, to share, to illustrate with lived experience. It felt like the voice of a man who had walked through both spotlight and silence and feared nothing anymore. The podcast had no sponsorship, no backing from Spotify, no flashy promotion, but it had something unforgettable authenticity. Most notably, Malcolm dedicated a section to Meghan Markle, and it wasn't praise. He used just 7 sharp words. She knows what the game is. For keen listeners, that wasn't simply about Markle. It was aimed at a system, Hollywood, the royal family, the press, and society's embrace of blackness that fits the mold. He didn't drag her down. He didn't mock her. He simply said, I'm visibly Black, so we see it right away. But she knows too, and she still chose to play the game. Without overanalysis, his audience understood that Warner was speaking to something much larger compromised with power to survive in a world not built for you. And that was something he always refused to do. After The Cosby Show, Warner could have taken the A-list route sitcoms adds. Even the flashy supporting roles Hollywood usually offers Black male actors. But he said no. For nearly 2 decades, he chose another path documentary's content on mass incarceration, systemic racism, the role of fathers in the Black community, and more recently a podcast on identity, Not All Hood. That final podcast episode wasn't sensational. But the longer you listened, the more it felt like he was transmitting a message he knew wouldn't be easily received. Hollywood loves a dark story edited down, he said. A simple but haunting line for him. That was the most honest description of how media treated black figures, filtered, softened, polished, and sold as digestible culture. And he refused to be a product. That's why Warner was never truly embraced again by Hollywood after The Cosby Show. No personal talk show, no hosting major programs, no lead roles in mainstream films despite his talent. In the eyes of the entertainment industry, Malcolm Jamal Warner was commercially inconvenient. He didn't fit the mold of the positive black star, nor did he play the troubled one Hollywood could redeem. He was himself, and that made people uncomfortable. His podcast wasn't an accusation. It was an autobiography, but one that stirred unease in a system used to controlling black voices. When an artist no longer needs a label, a director, or a spotlight, yet still draws tens of thousands of listeners with a raw voice alone, that's a threat to the system that built Hollywood on control. And right after that podcast, he died. Fans called it the final episode. Many replayed every word as if decoding a buried message. One quote spread widely. "I don't argue, I recount." Another. "If you still have to work to fit in, then that place was never meant for you." Each word now feels etched into the legacy of a brave man. In that very final episode, Malcolm also said, "If I disappear, at least I live free." No one expected that less than 48 hours later, it would become true. That podcast was never nominated for an award. Major media never covered it, but it spread quietly like a warning. Today, people don't just listen to remember, they listen to hear what he didn't get to finish. The truth is Malcolm Jamal Warner didn't use his podcast to create scandal. He used it to say the most important thing. We cannot live forever in silence, and we cannot let others define truth for us. And perhaps it's exactly because of that he was forced into silence. The father, the fighter, and the man. Hollywood never truly accepted. When a man knows he doesn't belong somewhere, he has two choices: bow his head to be allowed to stay, or walk away and build his own place. Malcolm Jamal Warner chose the second path, and the price of that decision was the silence that surrounded him until the day he died. Fans of The Cosby Show, the iconic sitcom that ran from 1984 to 1992, still remember the warmth in his eyes and the mischievous smile of young Theo Huxtable. Warner started that role at just 13. At the height of his fame, he was one of America's most beloved black actors, a true cultural icon. But few noticed that after the show ended, he quietly disappeared from Hollywood's glamorous spotlight. It wasn't because he stopped getting offers. On the contrary, Warner once admitted he turned down many major scripts not because of lack of money or opportunity, but because they were stereotypical, shallow, and distorted the black experience. He didn't want to play the addict in need of saving, nor the funny black psychic there to be background. Crime dramas, repetitive sitcoms, cheap comedies, all were rejected. Instead, Malcolm took another route, becoming an independent content creator focused on projects with deep social and spiritual impact. He spent more than a decade researching positive masculinity, the role of fathers, the spirit of the black community, and the long-term effects of systemic violence. Without the spotlight, Warner never stopped creating. He released jazz albums, experimented with spoken word poetry, and performed in small venues around Atlanta, where he lived. He authored the album The Revolution with Bevis, and later won a Grammy in 2015 for Best Traditional R&B Performance, an achievement the media almost completely ignored. Some people didn't even know he sang. For Warner, art wasn't a path to fame. It was a tool for healing and resistance. Most recently, he poured his heart into his podcast, Not All Hood, not to create content, but to speak the truths others avoided, the emotional scars of black men in modern society, not just from the outside, but from the crushing expectations within their own communities. Candace Kelly, Warner's podcast co-host, shared that just before his death, Malcolm sent a work email from the plane en route to Costa Rica for a family vacation. In that email, he wrote little, just one line. Next episode, we go deeper. It needs to be said we can't wait any longer. But there was no next episode. To those closest to him, Warner wasn't just an independent artist. He was a devoted father. Sherry Shepard, who starred with him in the sitcom Sherry 2009, tearfully said, "He was a proud dad, He loved his daughter with his whole heart. More than once, Malcolm canceled performances to throw birthday parties or pitch tents under the stars at his daughter's request. In his final podcast interview on Hot and Bay with Melissa Ford, May 21st, 2025, Warner shared something that left listeners speechless. "I'll be okay leaving this earth as long as I know and others know that I was a good man." It wasn't a philosophical quote. It was his personal code. And because he lived that way, honest, uncompromising, constantly reflecting, and unafraid to speak out, Hollywood never truly welcomed Malcolm Jamal Warner after Glow of You faded. He didn't appear at major award shows. He wasn't invited to grand reunions. When The Cosby Show was removed from streaming platforms due to Bill Cosby's scandal, Warner was one of the few cast members who didn't issue a public statement. His silence was an evasion. It was a rejection of a media-driven which Hunt cloaked in moral grandstanding. And that very silence, as well as his independent voice in later years, made him unfit for the type of black celebrity the system prefers. Warner wasn't Will Smith. He wasn't Kevin Hart. He didn't deliver laughs, escapism, or marketable narratives. He delivered truth and exposed shadows no one wanted to touch. Perhaps that's why, when he died, very few major media outlets gave his story the depth it deserved. Most headlines were reduced to one sentence: "The Cosby Show star drowns in Costa Rica." No mention of the podcast. No mention of his music career. No mention of the Grammy. No mention of the 8-year-old daughter who survived. No mention of anything beyond the past. Once again, Hollywood turned Malcolm back into young Theo and ignored the man he had become. But those who loved him never forgot. Tracy Ellis Ross wrote online, "He wasn't just an actor. He was presence. He was heart. He was light." Angela Bassett said, "He left a mark on me that will never fade." And Beyoncé, in a rare gesture, dedicated her website homepage to Malcolm. No long tribute, just one photo and a simple line: "Thank you for being part of our television history. A father, a fighter, a man so decent that no one thought someone might want him gone. But sometimes the world is not kind to men like that. And that's why his daughter, the sole survivor that day, might be the only one with the power to change everything. Because if anyone truly knows how her father lived and how he was erased, it's her. The only question now is, will they let her speak? Unnatural deaths. In the moment people laid flowers at Malcolm Jamal Warner's grave, a quiet question began to ripple through the crowd. Why him? A man with no scandals. A humble artist who lived quietly and worked relentlessly. A father who stepped away from the spotlight just to spend more time with his daughter. Yet his death, wrapped in the simple label of accident, stirred a familiar unease, a feeling we've all sensed before. And the first name that came to mind, Chadwick Boseman. The Black Panther star brought the world to tears when he died at 43 after a long private battle with cancer. But what made his passing so haunting wasn't the illness. It was what he left behind. Speeches that called out Hollywood's whitewashing, silent sacrifices that inspired millions across the black community. Chadwick had donated millions to medical research without fanfare. He died just as Day 5 Bloods and Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, two films that dove into black identity, hit the screen. He left at the exact moment his voice had become the strongest. Next came Nipsey Hussle, a rapper and community activist from Los Angeles. Nippy didn't just rap. He bought back real estate in Crenshaw, his childhood neighborhood, to empower black economic ownership. He publicly criticized LAPD tactics that targeted black-owned businesses. And then in broad daylight, he was gunned down in front of his own store, the very place he fought to protect. The media called it a personal dispute, but the community knew it meant something deeper than a street conflict. Then, before the headlines even settled, came Michael K. Williams, the actor immortalized as Omar Little. In The Wire, he was found dead from a fentanyl-laced overdose. But for those who followed his work, Michael wasn't a junkie. He was open about trauma, abuse in the entertainment industry, and the powers that distort truth. He had spoken about mental healing in the black community, and then he vanished. No public will, no final message, no deeper investigation. Further back, we remember Prince, one of the first black artists to challenge the music industry's corporate stronghold. He once performed with the word slave written on his face in protest of oppressive record contracts and intellectual property laws. Prince urged fellow black artists to retain ownership and go independent. And then they found him dead in an elevator, a silent ending for someone who had shaken the entire music world. Each of them, Chadwick, Nippy, Michael, Prince, share a pattern. They spoke up at the right moment, and they disappeared at the perfect time. None of them were arrested for scandals. None of them harmed their communities. They simply told the truth. And that truth, it seems, was unwelcome. And now Malcolm Jamal Warner is being placed among them. Not for fame, but because of the way Hollywood seems to repeat the same silent script. No major outlet ran Malcolm's final podcast on their front page. No mention of his Grammy. No praise for his post-Cosby show work as a path of independence and integrity. Instead, they called him a former child star, as if his 40 years of artistry had never happened. The question is, why don't men like them grow old in entertainment? It's not about age, not about talent. Maybe it's the truth they carry that's too heavy for the system to bear. They don't fit into digestible entertainment. They don't create flashy drama. They aren't managed by handlers who script every word. And they don't sell out to soothe society's guilt. Instead, they make us confront uncomfortable truths. And that's something Hollywood has always known how to help us forget. For Warner, the loss feels even heavier because he wasn't just an artist. He was a living blueprint of the modern black mankind. Educated, devoted to his family, independent and honest. He broke no laws. He crossed no ethical lines. Yet, he was still pushed out of view. More troubling still, from Prince to Malcolm. Every death left not just a personal void, but a cultural one. When someone like Warner disappears, the questions left behind are the ones no one inside the system is willing to answer. And so, the fans turn to each other. They use hashtags. They replay podcasts. They post old videos. They rewrite the story that the media tried to wrap up in a 2-line obituary. One user on Twitter wrote, "They don't want you to remember him as the man who stood for truth. They want you to remember a sitcom role from 30 years ago. But we're different. We remember Malcolm Jamal Warner as a torchbearer who never bowed." That's why even though Warner's death was officially labeled an accident caused by a rip current, thousands are still asking why then. Why after that podcast? Why did no one see anything? Why hasn't the media asked his daughter, the only witness, what really happened? One question leads to another. And by now, the public isn't just mourning. They want to know how many more must be silenced before we admit this isn't coincidence. Malcolm Jamal Warner, Chadwick Boseman, Nippy Hussle, Michael K., Williams, Prince. None of them are alive to finish their stories. But this time, one person remains. That 8-year-old girl, the one who saw it all, the one who was in the water, the sole survivor. And now she might be the only person who can speak the truth her father never got to finish. The question is, will they let her speak? The girl who didn't cry, the final witness and the silenced voice. Amid all the contradictions, suspicions, and haunting silence surrounding the death of Malcolm Jamal Warner, one person has yet to speak and has yet to be heard, his 8-year-old daughter, the sole survivor. Across hundreds of news articles reporting Warner's death, her name is never mentioned. No, reporter reached out to ask how she felt. No media outlet sought her account as the only living witness at the scene. The only person who truly knows what happened in the rip currents of Playa Grande that day. Though still a child, she may be the most important witness the public is yet to hear. According to Elbert Lahan, the head of tourism police in the Atlantic region, he personally saw Warner and his daughter play near the shoreline before being pulled out by a rip current. Another witness from Nicaragua swam into the sea and used his surfboard to bring the girl safely back to shore. That rescue happened. But strangely, after everything, the child has not been treated as a key witness needing protection, a voice needing to be heard, or even someone deserving of public comfort. In media coverage, she's mentioned as a passing detail present rescued safe, and then disappears from a narrative. No one asked what she saw. No one questioned why there were no cries for help. No audio calls from the beach. No surveillance cameras. No bystander footage. And not a single account from the girl, the last person to see Warner before he lost consciousness. Why? The answer lies not only in the media's neglect, but in a familiar pattern. In many controversial cases, surviving witnesses, especially children, are often held back from the public, not necessarily to protect them, but to protect a predetermined version of events. Psychologists have long pointed out that after trauma, children are often placed in states of enforced silence, not because they don't want to speak, but because adults don't want to hear, sometimes for protection, often out of fear of what they might say. In this case, the truth might not be complex. It might be as simple as a single sentence. Daddy screamed, or someone else was in the water, or no one helped. But even one sentence could shatter the rushed silence built around Warner's death. And that is something the system, from Hollywood to the media, may not be ready to face. No one knows where she is now. No one knows how she's doing, whether she's receiving trauma therapy, whether she's trying to remember or being taught to forget. But one thing is certain, that child watched her father die in broad daylight on a public beach during what was supposed to be a harmless family vacation. And if what happened that day does not match the official report, if something was hidden, edited, or replaced, only she would know. Candace, Kelly Warner's co-host on the Not All Hood podcast, once said Malcolm was a father, a real dad. He put his daughter before everything. He once canceled all work because his daughter wanted camp outside. He postponed performances to attend parent-teacher meetings. He said, "My family is the light of my life." Would a father like that really take his child into red flag waters with no life jackets, no lifeguards, no warning signs? Or is that just the most convenient narrative to close the case? Costa Rican authorities released two conflicting versions. One said Warner went into the water with his daughter. Another claimed he left her on shore and went in with a friend. But those at the scene, like the Nicaraguan witness, confirmed the girl was in the water with her father and was brought back on a surfboard. So, who is telling the truth? And why did the final report by OIJ omit that critical detail? If Warner's daughter confirmed she was in the water with her father, it means there was screaming. It means there was time for someone to call for help. It means this wasn't a sudden accident the report describes. It means someone knew and didn't act. She hasn't spoken, not because she can't, but maybe because she hasn't been allowed to. No one knows what the future holds. But if one day when she's older, she decides to tell her story, everything could change. And this time, it wouldn't come through journalists or secondhand accounts. It would come from the child who lost her father in a death the world rushed to label a tragedy and nothing more. The question is no longer what happened. The question now is, will Hollywood have the courage to listen when she finally decides to speak? Because if one sentence from that little girl can unravel everything hiding behind Malcolm Jamal Warner's death, that's the truth they fear most. Malcolm Jamal Warner didn't die because of the waves. He was drowned in a web of silence that Hollywood has been weaving for decades. They ignored what he said. They erased what he left behind. They called his death an accident, as if he had never issued any warning. But amid the cold headlines and the carefully written narratives, one small voice remains the voice of an 8-year-old girl who was by his side until the very end. And when she tells what she saw, everything will change. So, how much longer will we wait? Wait until every piece of evidence is gone, or until someone else is forced into silence? Share this video. Subscribe. Stay with us. Because when the truth is silenced, we must be the ones to speak. All data analyses and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast. There is still so much more to explore. Stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now appearing on your